We have seen that the select clause allows us to get any columns from our table in any order. But the select clause has many other powers. So let's see what else we can do with it. One useful thing to know about SQL is that you can add comments in the code, and comments are parts of text which are not executed as code. They're just there for you to keep track of things or explain what you are doing. So I'm going to write a few comments now. And the way we do comments is by doing dash dash. And now I'm going to show you aliasing. Aliasing is simply renaming a column. So I could take the level column and say as character level, provided a new name. And after I run this, we can see that the name of the column has changed. Now, one thing that's important to understand as we now start transforming the data with our queries is that any sort of change that we apply, such as in this case, we change the name of the column, it only affects our results. It does not affect the original table that we are querying. So no matter what we do here moving forward, the actual table, fantasy characters, will not change. All that will change are the results that we get after running our query. And of course, there are ways to go back to fantasy characters and permanently change it, but that is outside the scope for us. And going back to our schema, you will see that alias has its own component and it happens at the same time as the select component. And this is important because, as we will see in a bit, that it's a common temptation to use these aliases, these labels that we give to columns, in the phases that precede this stage, which typically fails because, as our rules say, every component does not have access to data that is computed after it. So something that we will come back to. Now, another power of select that we want to show is constants. And constants is the ability of creating new columns which have a constant value. For example, let's say that I wanted to implement a versioning system for my characters. And I would say that right now, all the characters I have are version 1. But then in the future, every time I change a character, I will increase that version. And so that will allow me to keep track of changes. I can do that by simply writing 1 over here in the column definition. And when I run this, you will see that SQL has created a new column and it has put 1 for every row in that column. This is why we call it a constant column. So if I scroll down, all of it will be 1. And this column has a weird name because we haven't provided a name for it yet, but we already know how to do this. We can use the aliasing command to call it version. And here we go. So in short, when you write a column name in the select statement, SQL looks for that column in the table and gives you that column. But when instead you write a value, SQL creates a new column and puts that value in every row. The next thing that SQL allows me to do is calculations. So let me call the experience column here as well and get my data. Now, one thing I could do is to take experience and divide it by 100. So what we see here is a new column, which is the result of this calculation. Now, 100 is a constant value, right? So you can imagine in the background, SQL has created a new column and put 100 in every row, and then it has done the calculation between experience and that new column, and we get this result. And in short, we can do any sort of calculation we want, combining current columns and constants as will. For example, although this doesn't make any sense, I could take experience, add 100 to it, divided by character level, and then multiply it by 2. And we see that we got an error. Can you understand why we got this error? Pause the video and think for a second. I am referring to my column as character level. But what is character level really? It is a label that I have assigned over here. Now, if we go back to our schema, we can see that select and alias happen at the same time. So this is the phase in which we assign our label, and this is also the phase in which we try to call our label. Now, if you look at our rules, this is not supposed to work because an operation can only use data produced by operations before it. And alias does not happen before select, it happens at the same time. In other words, this part over here, when we say character level, is attempting to use information that was produced right here when we assign the label. But because these parts happen at the same time, it's not aware of the label. All this to say that the logical order of operations matters, and that what we want here is to actually call it level, because that is the name of the column in the table. And now when I run this, I get a resulting number. And so going back to our original point, we are able to combine columns and constants with any sort of arithmetic operations. Another very powerful thing that SQL can do is to apply functions. And a function is a pre-packaged piece of logic that you can apply to our data. And it works like this. There is a function called SQRT, which stands for square root, which takes a number and computes the square root. So you call the function by name, and then you open round brackets. And in round brackets, you provide the argument. And the argument can be a constant, such as 16, or it can be a column, such as level. And when I run this, you can see that in this case, the square root of 16 is calculated as 4, and this creates a constant column. And then here, for each value of level, we have also computed the square root. There are many functions in SQL, and they vary according to the data type which you provide. As you remember, we said that knowing the data types of columns, such as distinguishing between numbers and text, is important because it allows us to know which operations we can apply. And so there are functions that work only on certain data types. For example, here we see square root, which only works on numbers, but we also have text functions or string functions which only work on text. One of them is upper. So if I take upper and provide guild as an argument, what do you expect will happen? We have created a new column where the guild is shown in all uppercase. So how can I remember which functions there are and how to use them? The short answer is I don't. There are many functions in SQL, and here in the documentation you can see a very long list of all the functions that you can use in BigQuery. And as we said, the functions vary according to the data that they can work on. So if you look here on the left, we have array functions, date functions, mathematical functions, numbering functions, time functions, and so on and so on. It is impossible to remember all of these functions, so all you need to know is how to look them up when you need them. For example, if I know I need to work with numbers, I could scroll down here and go to mathematical functions. And here I have a long list of all the mathematical functions, and I can see them all on the right. And I should be able to find the square root function that I have showed you. And here the description tells me what the function does, and it also provides some examples. To summarize, these are some of the most powerful things you can do with the select statement. Not only you can retrieve every column you need in any order, you can rename columns according to your needs. You can define constant columns with a value that you choose. You can combine columns and constant columns in all sorts of calculations. And you can apply functions to do more complex work. I definitely invite you to go ahead and put your own data in BigQuery as I've shown you, and then start playing around with select and see how you can transform your data with it.